Hello, and welcome to the 92nd Street Y New York series, The State of New York, where we give you a chance to get to know the people making decisions about New York's future. We want this series to serve as a platform for fostering meaningful dialogue and to introduce you to the decision makers who are creating New York's future, giving audiences the opportunity to learn more about what makes our city tick and the pressing issues that shape our lives. I'm Seth Pinsky, CEO of 92NY, and today we're exploring a wide range of transportation issues with the Chair and CEO of New York's Metropolitan Transportation Authority, Janno Lieber. Thank you to each of you for joining us today, and now let's get started. We're joined today by Chair and CEO of the MTA, Janno Lieber. Janno, welcome.
Good to be with you.
So let's start with a framing question. I'm curious where we are right now in terms of the post-COVID recovery when it comes to the transit network, the buses, the subways, and the commuter rails.
Seth, I think we're in great shape. The rest of transit in the United States is struggling a bit. Hybrid work from home, and people moving away to some extent from some urban centers has really hurt transit in many, many communities across the country. In New York, transit has come back like gangbusters. We're now on subway, buses, and commuter rail adjusting a little bit for the growth in fare evasion, which is its own challenge, but we've got about between 80 and 85% of the ridership that we had before COVID, even though New York's lost a little population and work from home is still having some real impact. So we're thrilled about the return to transit. And just this year, since the beginning of the year, we're seeing something like between 8 and 10% year-over-year growth in ridership, in paid ridership on each of our services, a little lower on Metro North, a little higher on subways and Long Island Railroad. So very positive signs. And it's helped us to stabilize our financial situation, although as everybody knows, we got to invest in fixing the infrastructure, which has been neglected for so long.
And we'll definitely come back to that. But before moving on to another topic, my understanding is that while the numbers have come back, the distribution of ridership in terms of times of day, days of the week, has changed somewhat since the pandemic. Can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing on that front?
I think it's stuff that New Yorkers who are living in the city and use the system understand, which is hybrid work is not gone away. It's still a thing. It's still a big piece of our economy. So we see the highest ridership on mass transit Tuesday through Thursday. Mondays have come back. People were giving up on Monday, but Mondays have really started to come back, and we're even seeing Fridays push 4 million and hit 4 million riders on the subway a couple times. So those are signs that, again, normality in terms of a 5-day work week is slowly coming back. But what is positive and really speaks to where the city is at is that the strongest rebound has been nights and weekends. When people have somewhere to go, whether it's going to theater or to visit people or just out for the nightlife, they are taking transit in proportions that suggest really good things. So we get on the Long Island Railroad on the weekends, we're over 100% on many weekends. Subways are consistently in the 90 to 95% range on the weekends. So positive signs that when people have somewhere, as I say, that they want to go, they're taking transit, and that's good for everybody.
So the good news is that ridership is coming back. We're not quite all the way to where we were before COVID.
But an important point is we've lost some jobs. We've lost some people, not jobs actually, but people. And sometimes that gets overlooked when people are trying to apples compare numbers. So I think where we are is, as I said, very positive vis-a-vis return to use of mass transit.
Well, that's great, and it's good that we're moving in a positive direction. One of the things that people talk about when they talk about the glass being more half empty than half full, and the fact that ridership is down is that part of what is driving riders away from the system, especially the subway, is a fear of crime. And by some measures, the statistics are concerning. The New York Times recently ran a story talking about how versus pre-pandemic, many major crime categories are up substantially. At the same time, even more than the statistics, I think the perception of crime in the subways, because of some high-profile incidents that I think all of our viewers know about, have really made people hesitant to take public transit at certain times of day. When you go onto a subway platform and you see everyone standing up against the wall, which is something that you didn't see a few years ago, I think that's a sign of it. On the flip side, I know that in the first quarter of this year, some of the statistics have indicated that crime is now moving in a more positive direction. So I guess the question I have for you is, when you look at safety on our various transit systems, and especially on the subway, do you think that we're in a glass half full situation, a glass half empty situation, or how do you view the current situation?
I think you can't look at it either or. You have to acknowledge the statistics, because we live in a fact-based world, or at least, I'm going to continue to live in a fact-based world no matter what's going on at the national political level. And the stats are very heartening, right? We are, as you said, we're down roughly 30% in felony crime in the subway system since last year over year. That's a significant positive trend. You rarely get moves of that scale in a single year. And even more significant from my standpoint, because we always look to pre-COVID, we're down 40+% vis-a-vis where we were in the couple months right before COVID, in January, February, and early March of 2020. So those are very positive signs. The one category, and I think it's gotten emphasized, you mentioned that New York Times story, it's true, but there's one category that has everybody concerned about, and that is what we call felony assaults. So those are crimes where somebody hits somebody else, and obviously it does this, serious violence, whether it's with a weapon or not, and those are up. We have dug into those a fair amount. A lot of the increase is attributable to the fact that we are doing more enforcement in the system. Our friends at the NYPD, who everybody knows, they control the law enforcement in the subway system. And people are, and this is a real concern, people are hauling off and hitting and attacking the cops when they get a fare evasion summons, for example. That has been responsible for a piece of the growth in felony assaults. And likewise, we have reclassified attacks on transit workers. This is something the MTA pushed for. Any attack on a transit worker, because they're a public servant, they're in most cases defenseless and just doing their job, is classified as a felony. And therefore, any assault on a transit worker contributes to that growth in felony assaults. So those two categories are a big chunk of the increase. Nevertheless, there is reason to bear down on why we have more felony assaults. Some of it is the presence of folks who are struggling with mental illness, who are unpredictable, and who do bad stuff unpredictably, like hitting transit workers. And we have to get those people into a better situation. The subway is no place for somebody with serious mental illness to be unmedicated, not being looked after. And that's why it is making a difference that we have, with both Governor Hochul and with support from the police commissioner and a lot of city initiatives, is pushing to get more people who qualify for, who really need to be indoors, what you call it, involuntary commitment, or just do enough outreach to bring them indoors voluntarily. And I won't get into the stats, but the MTA has been deeply involved in making sure there are a lot of outreach workers, backed up by cops in many cases, so that we can deal with this population, which has impacted on all of our public spaces in New York, but is especially disheartening and in some cases alarming when you're in a closed subway car with someone who's having a psychotic episode, or on a platform and someone's really yelling and screaming and obviously struggling with mental health stuff. That's much more alarming in that kind of public space where you can't always move away as easily. And so we really do want those folks to get treated. The subway is no place for them to be housing, and whether it's by involuntary commitment or voluntarily going as a result of outreach efforts, that has been a priority. It's starting to make a difference, and we're going to keep pushing on that front.
And let me just pick up on something that you said a minute ago, which is that there's a lot about the subway and the environment in the subway and on the transit system more broadly that you don't control. You have a powerful job, but you are not the state legislature, you're not the governor, you're not the police commissioner, et cetera. If in a hypothetical world you could completely control the transit environment, are there things that you would want to see changed or that you would do that you think would substantially improve the experience and the perception of public safety for the riders of the transit system?
Well, I mean, listen, the number one thing is you don't want people who are struggling with mental health issues having such a disproportionate impact on the public space. The subway is not only a means of transportation, it's the thing that makes New York possible. So, people can live here and not own a car, or own one car instead of two, because we have this great mass transit system. It's what makes it possible to bring all these people together, have this powerhouse of an economy that we have. If you make people feel like I can't use that system, you are taking away what makes New York possible, and you're taking away their freedom. If parents can't send a kid comfortably to school on the subway, to high school or middle school, you're taking away their school choice. If an older person can't get around because they feel unsafe in the mass transit system, you're taking away their ability to really have a comfortable retirement in New York, and so on and so on. So I am a bear about subway safety and the perception and experience of safety and orderliness in the public space. One of the key things that makes New York work, and I think that a lot of folks associated with 92nd Street, well, I get it, is that we all share this public space. We're super dense, 9 times a Sunbelt city like Houston or Phoenix. But the reason that it works is that we all have kind of an implicit agreement where we're going to play by the same rules in the public space because we have to share it. The same way we share playgrounds, the same way we share libraries, the same way we share all these things that are so important that bring us together and make us feel like a community in this dense environment. And when people break rules in the subway, it's not just, oh, that's annoying, that person's smoking where they shouldn't be. It creates a sense of disorderliness. What else would that person do if they're willing to break all the rules? So I would actually start with, really making it much harder to beat the fare. And that's not just financially. It's the sense of, for the financial benefit to the MTA, it's the sense of orderliness that starts at the entrance to the whole system. I would make it, I would like to make it more physical infrastructure than police enforcement, but we intend to change all of the subway turnstiles, which are totally outdated to the reality of what's going on in New York today. And we need modern fare gates in order to stop it. We need to close those exit gates, which the fire code requires, but which have become, as I always say, the super highway of fare evasion. And we need more people to feel like, as you come in, that this isn't a place which from the get-go seems like there are no rules here, but it feels like this is a shared space that everybody respects. So I would be, I'm not a law enforcement maximalist at all, but I do want to create a very safe and law-abiding environment for everybody in mass transit. That's the principal thing that I would address. But the mental health issues are sort of much bigger than just subway. It's the most, the place you experience it most directly or face to face with our social problems. it's something that we as a society need to address. I grew up in New York when they were deinstitutionalizing people out of the big mental psychiatric inpatient facilities all around the state, and all those people were coming into neighborhoods. There were very few of them, and they weren't having, but they were starting to be recognized as a feature of our streets. As I grew up on the West Side in the 70s, it has burgeoned into a huge impact on our city, and we have to deal with it.
So let's switch gears from one topic over which you don't have full control to another topic over which you don't have full control. And it's a topic that you and I discussed about a year ago, I guess, when we last spoke, and that is congestion pricing. When we spoke last, we were getting prepared to launch congestion pricing. That launch was scheduled to be imminent. Then the governor decided to pause the launch, and after the elections last year, the program was brought back at a slightly different toll level. The program did finally launch. It was approved by the Biden administration, and then subsequently, the Trump administration has come out strongly opposed to congestion pricing, has threatened to shut it down. I think there was a March 21st deadline that now has been extended by 30 days. But in the meantime, we have congestion pricing. So I want to get into the dispute with Washington. But before we talk about that, I'm curious from your perspective how you think congestion pricing has rolled out so far.
I think it's a historic success. Very rarely is the government able to do something which immediately has positive benefits and everybody notices. We turned on congestion pricing the 5th of January, and within days, New Yorkers, including tons of people who had previously been against it, were recognizing the benefits of, a lot less congestion and a lot faster travel speeds. And interestingly, not only the mass transit riders and the urbanists and the environmentalists were loving congestion pricing as it rolled out, but all of a sudden, the drivers, the people who really do drive to Manhattan Central Business District, were flipping their views as reflected in polling data and saying, we love this, this is saving us so much time. Businesses which are wasting billions, according to studies, with tradesmen and materials and deliveries waiting in traffic, are loving saving all that time and money. And New Yorkers in general are loving not just how much quicker it is to get in and out of the city, and there are people saving, anywhere from 10 to 30 minutes who are coming through bridges and tunnels from whether it's New Jersey or Long Island or other parts of the region. But people are seeing there is a ton less, actually measured by all kinds of sensors. There's a ton less noise complaints. There are a ton fewer car crashes that result in pedestrian injuries, down north of 20% in the first couple of months. So we have safer streets, we have less congestion, less noise pollution. Somebody who lives next to the Midtown Tunnel, who I know a little bit, they own 5 restaurants, told me they had the best January and February in years. And we've changed their lives because they live next to the Midtown Tunnel, and life is so much better with less congestion and less noise. So everybody's enjoying the benefits. In some ways, it's a surprise about how quickly you can improve things. And that's what I love about this, is it gives us some confidence that government can actually do something if you are willing to take on a big issue that is a little complicated. We did the work. We rolled it out flawlessly in terms of the cameras in the back office and the charging and the communications and all that. And it's had huge success from a public standpoint in every different customer base, whether they're drivers or transit riders or, as I said, just New Yorkers who are interested in a better city.
So let's get into the dispute now with Washington. On what grounds is the Trump administration saying that they're going to reverse the approval of congestion pricing? And what is it that has made you and Governor Hochul so confident that, in her words, the cameras are going to stay on?
Listen, there was an agreement reached. There was an agreement reached between the federal government and the MTA and our partners, city and state DOT, that approved the program. The program was approved under a specific federal program that's been in existence for more than 20 years. I think it maybe 30 years. I think it started under the first President Bush. And under the terms of that agreement, it can't be terminated unilaterally by the federal government. That's what gives us such confidence that we're in strong position legally. The Trump administration's critique of the program, such as it is, has been that somehow their own US DOT wasn't empowered to approve it, or that it somehow doesn't comply with the terms of the program. It's not totally clear what they're talking about, but the terms of the federal, what they call the value pricing program, were very clear that the federal government can't unilaterally terminate an approval. So that's really what's separating us. But the downside for the feds, I'm not sure they recognize it or care about it, is if you pull away approvals randomly from programs that have been in effect for some time, you may be putting at risk programs like toll roads in Florida and Texas, which were approved under the same federal power, that bondholders are relying on those approvals when they purchase the bonds secured by the toll roads revenues in Texas and Florida. They may be doing harm to the bond market and the ability to produce new roads in ways that are very popular in some red states. So we'll have to see if that matters to them or not. But in the meantime, we went into federal court right away asking the judge, who's been active dealing with all the congestion pricing litigation in the Southern District of New York, to also rule on what we think is the invalidity of the administration's attempt to terminate the program.
Do you think that there is a deal that could be struck with the Trump administration where ultimately both sides could pull back from the brink and save congestion pricing and allow the administration to declare some version of victory?
It's probably not for me to comment on a hypothetical like that. Right now, we're in the legal process, but as you point out, the cameras are still running, the program's still in effect. We're still, getting all the benefits of congestion pricing, which have, been growing even as time goes on. And we'll see what happens. Obviously, any discussion with the Trump administration about where we go from here is going mostly through Governor Hochul, who herself has created a dialogue with the president about a number of things, and this is on that agenda as well. So that'll be, those discussions are really hers to carry on, and we'll support her as it unfolds.
I want to just ask one more question about congestion pricing. I remember when I served in city government, we had a dispute with the state over a program. I don't even remember what the program was, but it was a program where the state was supposed to give us money, and they were saying that we weren't entitled to the money. And I was pretty confident that if we took the state to court, that we would, in fact, be able to secure the funding. And I remember one of the political advisors to Mayor Bloomberg at the time, who was advising me, said, this is a fight that you can't win, because even if you win in this particular case, the state has so many other levers, has so much leverage, there's so many other pockets that they can pick, so to speak, from the city, that even if you win, you're not going to win. And when I look at the fight over congestion pricing, I think about all the other sources of federal funding across the state, and even that the MTA is expecting. Do you think that ultimately this is a fight that the MTA and the state can win with the Trump administration, the fight over congestion pricing?
Our hope is that as they process the reality that there are a lot of folks who maybe were opposed to congestion pricing before, but who are now thrilled and asking it to be kept on, as they deal with both the reality of the benefits and also the way that public opinion has shifted pretty dramatically, that their views will evolve over time. We're in a very tumultuous period, and early in the presidency. It's no secret there's a ton of breakage going on in Washington. Whatever you think of the substance, it is a period of massive change. I think that there is. I always believe that over time facts do matter, and certainly political opinions matter. And I think we've got both of those on our side, and that for those reasons, I am pretty comfortable that we can and will prevail. The bigger question of how the state of New York deals with what's coming out of Washington is really much bigger than congestion pricing. I mean, it goes to the fundamentals of the federal government's historic support for basic human services like Medicaid or Social Security, which seem to be all of a sudden, I don't know if I describe it as on the chopping block, but certainly in a period of tumultuous change where folks are seeing a lot of risk and there's a lot of growing anxiety. I think those issues are likely to be dealt with separately from congestion pricing because they have such huge national and political implications. So I don't see congestion pricing the tail wagging the dog of Medicaid, education, and Social Security.
So one of the purposes of congestion pricing, in addition to reducing traffic, is to generate revenue for the MTA and to help to pay for the MTA's last capital plan. You've put forward a new capital plan, which is a $68 billion plan. I want to talk a little bit about that plan. And if we could start with this question: what is it that you are hoping to do with the $68 billion that you're looking to raise? And I want to ask a corollary question, which is that I understand that you actually believe that the MTA needs more than $68 billion. Why did you ultimately go out with a $68 billion capital request?
Well, I mean, look, here's the bottom line is that there are a lot of folks who will watch this who have been around long enough to know that for maybe the first 75 years of the subway's existence, there was not a lot of investment made in its physical infrastructure. And that's why, starting in the early 80s, when Dick Ravitch began the first MTA capital program, the system was literally falling apart. The subway system that I grew up riding in the 1970s, the IRT, as we called it still then, was literally on the verge. The trains broke down every 5,000 miles. There were derailments. You never got off the local in the hopes that the express would come, because the chances that another train would come anytime soon were pretty uncertain. There were significant investments made. We fixed the track so the trains didn't fall off the tracks every 5 minutes. We got new rail cars, so instead of breaking down every 5,000 miles, our train frequency of breakdowns went up by 40 times, but 25 to 30 times. That's for the good. But there is a ton of stuff that my predecessors never got to, and it's just continued to get older and break down more and more frequently. The power systems, they're underground, they're not sexy, nobody sees them, but they're starting to blow up because nobody's invested in them. And we have literally hundreds of power substations that are in poor or marginal condition, that are on the verge and that could actually cause us to lose power and have people stuck in tunnels and trains. The structure itself, both the elevated structures that exist especially in the boroughs, but also the tunnels themselves, have been subjected to water, salt, and chemicals for 100+ years, and nobody has really made the investments to make sure they work. The signals, in most cases in our system, the train signals are from the era of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, some of them from Teddy Roosevelt. It's bizarre. We have to update it. If we don't, we're playing Russian roulette with this system. So I have made the case, and the MTA has, for the first time, went out and looked at the entire system physically. We looked at 6 million components and assets and did a huge report, which used to be done, go in the back room and write it up in a week, not based on analysis. But we went out and did all this analysis, turned it into a huge report. It's called our 20-year needs assessment. And it's fact-based, and it shows that we are a tremendous risk if we don't invest in this very unsexy but basic core infrastructure of the subway system, but also of some of the commuter rail systems and even of the bus system as well. So we came up with a program which, as you say, is $68 billion over 5 years. That is actually less of an increase than inflation over our current 5-year program, which is $55 billion. So we think we're going in pretty low. You're right. We went and asked JP Morgan Chase to look at how much would need to be invested, compare us to, say, a freight railroad or an industrial operation like Con Ed to see if what it would take to get us up to a state of good repair. And they said, you need probably 20 plus billion a year, which would be an over $100 billion program. We brought this down, not because we're randomly lowballing, but what we said is we can only get so much money, but let's make sure that at the end of this 5-year program, we are moving away in every category from moving towards the cliff of system breaking down more and more and more as time goes on, that we're making the system better and more secure. So we won't have solved the whole problem to bring the system into a state of good repair, but we will have made significant progress. The things that the customers will see that matter to customers, and this is important, Seth, that unsexy stuff, that determines whether the train really is able to run on time and not break down and stick people with long delays in the tunnel, as New Yorkers have usually experienced. Being able to replace the signal system means we can run more trains safely closer together, more frequency. So there are real benefits to New Yorkers. But on top of that, we're going to continue our historic investment in accessibility, getting elevators into all these 500 subway stations so that every New Yorker can use the system, whether you're in a wheelchair, you have a stroller, you have a shopping cart, whether you're just an older person who's, that reached that stage where getting up and down stairs ain't really an option anymore. So there are real benefits in terms of upgrades coming. And there's one line that we think is an important expansion investment that we must make, which is to connect Brooklyn and Queens. There's an abandoned rail line out there that is almost totally unutilized. It needs to be turned into a light rail connection between Brooklyn and Queens. You shouldn't have to go through Manhattan to get from Brooklyn to Queens, and that's what most people are forced to do right now.
And in terms of paying for the $68 billion, so my understanding is that $35 billion of that is deemed to be identified, although I think 14 billion of the 35 billion is federal funding, so I don't know how much the state and the MTA can count on even that portion of the $35 billion. That still leaves, even if you assume that that money will be there, $33 billion that needs to be identified. What do you think is the right way to cover that $33 billion remaining hole? And in particular, what I've heard the governor and the legislature talking about recently is increasing taxes, which surprised me a little bit because one of the reasons that the governor cited for pausing congestion pricing was concern about the recovery of the economy in Manhattan in particular, and saying that there already were significant burdens being placed on the workers coming in and out of Manhattan, and that she was concerned about placing additional burdens. So now we're talking about yet more burdens being placed on them. What do you think is the right answer? Because somewhere we need to find this $33 billion and maybe $47 billion, depending on whether the federal government stands behind its obligations.
I'll take this hopefully one at a time. Number one is this assertion that it was never realistic to view congestion pricing as a burden on the working class or poor people because those folks do not drive to jobs in Midtown Manhattan because they can't afford parking, even if they have a car. Overwhelmingly, people of limited means, working class people, or even low income folks take transit. So that was a bit of a shibboleth that I think over time has diminished, and we're already seeing how happy folks who are the drivers are happy, but that's because the people who drive and pay for parking in Manhattan do have the $9 to pay the toll. Listen, the MTA, on the question of how to fund the capital program, the MTA has historically taken the position that we have to be agnostic, right? That the political authorities have to decide how to come up with the money. It's needed in order to deliver the kind of mass transit system that everybody, needs and expects and deserves in New York. But we're not weighing in favor of a specific tax or approach to the problem. I take the view that in the $250 billion state of New York budget, there ought to be room for dealing with this very predictable necessity. I mean, this is an essential service. It's one of the things that makes New York possible. It makes no sense to me that it is treated like this, oh, big surprise, you need to bail out the MTA. That's a function of the slightly artificial separation of the MTA from state government, right? That we're a state authority and somehow magically we're supposed to self-support, although there's no transit system on earth that really self-supports. It's one of the things I think is most misleading about the way we deal with transit in this country. But in any event, so we're going to leave it to the legislature and the governor to resolve. They've all said the right thing, though, the important thing, Seth, which is they recognize that the program must be funded. They recognize that not investing in fixing and maintaining and upgrading our mass transit system is not a real option. So we're counting on them as part of this state budget to carry it, to resolve it. We do want to, we'll help them and we'll look at the implications of if they're going to use this revenue source versus that one and how does it grow over time, all the analysis required to decide which approaches are more or less beneficial and who pays and all that. We will participate in that, but we're not going to be telling folks which revenue source to rely on. And in fairness, we've got a pro-transit legislature and I really believe a very pro-transit governor. So I think it's going to come out okay in the end. But I went up to Albany last week, and I'll be going again as the budget drags out, as it appears to be doing, just to make sure that we don't end up with some unintentional drop balls in the end that cause the transit system to be underfunded.
So we're running short on time, and we've covered a lot of topics, a lot of them being issues that the MTA is facing. But as we started out, and as you said at the very beginning, really what the MTA does is absolutely essential to the region. And while there are certainly lots of problems with our transit system, without it, the city and the region would not be able to function. So as somebody who cares deeply about our transit system and somebody who's passionate about transit, what is it that gives you cause for hope when you look forward into the future when it comes to transit in the New York area?
I think fundamentally that what we're seeing in how people are using transit is that the benefits that we're seeing a generation that really embraces transit as part of a quality urban lifestyle, right? That you can get around and do a ton of stuff, and density has created dynamism in our city economically and culturally, and educationally, and we have a generation of folks who are gravitating to New York in part because it has a transit system as one of its great urban features. I am incredibly optimistic. The system is a lot better than it was. I mean, we tend to focus on the shortcomings, especially the safety challenges, but we're running the best subway service we've had in much more than 10 years. The Long Island Railroad and Metro North are running historic on-time performance, 97, 98, 99% on-time performance, really high customer satisfaction, which is hard to achieve in some of those, especially Long Island suburban communities. So we're very happy with where we are. We just have to make sure we don't let the system fall apart, that we continue to improve it, and that the perception of the public space and especially transit as a positive part of being in New York and using New York continues to grow.
Well, Janno, I wanted to thank you very much for joining us today and to wish you good luck with all of the important work that you're doing. And I look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you.
Thought you were going to say Aziz and Pesach, but go figure.